I'm so excited to show you this bag. Hi, I'm Emma from Studio 77, and on this video I'm going to show you the Konin Bowler Bag from Country Cow Designs. Now let me tell you, this is a beautiful bag. This is going to be a perfect everyday bag. It's got some great pockets in there. You've got a slip pocket, you've got a zipper pocket and some card slots as well. It's not a really hard bag. This is great if you don't like that kind of really pushing it through, turning or birthing of the bag that sometimes you have to do at the end. It does have bound seams on the inside, but you don't need to worry too much about that. I didn't find them too tricky. It is a little bit of a push and a pull, but as long as you go slowly around those curves, it's going to be fine. I would definitely say this is a bit more intermediate. There's some great choices for hardware in there. You can add your own style. You could even add a fancy panel to the front. There are so many different options. In the description below, you're going to find a link to the pattern. You're going to find a link to the vinyl and the hardware that I used. These were gifted to me for this project, but I have to say I absolutely love them. The quality is amazing in both the hardware and the vinyl, and there's a discount if you're watching this in the first few weeks as well that you can find in the description below. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is to download the Konin pattern from Country Cow Designs, and you can find a link in the description below. And then you want to cut out and interface all your pieces, so prep all your pieces. She actually adds on these little tags so you can clip all your tags to your different pieces so you don't get lost and you know which pieces go where. I really like that. Now I have to admit I made a little bit of a boo-boo and I didn't have quite enough fabric. So in the pattern it says you need 1/4 yard in the exterior and 1/2 yard in the lining fabric. Now because I'm mixing it up a little bit and I'm using cotton and vinyl or leatherette, I kind of wanted to chance it and see if I could get the lining out of the same as my cotton that I'm using on the exterior. I had 1/2 meter of this fabric and it almost fitted. It was so close to fitting. I just didn't have enough for one of the lining fabrics in this main piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to piece some together to make it fit. So if you only have 1/2 meter of fabric, this is what you need to do. If you find that you run out, you may find that you piece yours better and you can fit it all in. But it does mean that you can get this made out of 1/2 meter of fabric. So I'll show you that in a minute. So I've got all my supplies that I need, all my D-rings and my zip and everything. I've put my zipper pulls on my zipper tape. You can find the hardware that I used in the description as well. It's also from Country Cow Designs. So after I'd cut out all my pieces, this is what I was left with. Not quite enough to fit the kind of main panel piece on. It's so close though, look at that. So what I'm going to do is, because this is going to be on the inside, it's going to be underneath the mesh slip pocket. You're not really going to see it. So I'm just going to find a piece that matches a little bit. So I think that's going to go quite nicely. I'm going to make that into a straight line and I'm going to sew that, make sure that it fits in. That is just going to fit. So I'm going to sew that right sides together down that line. Then I'm going to press it open, cut out the shape and then interface it just like I would normally. Because it's got a busy print, I really don't think you're going to see it, and it's on the inside anyway. Yep, I'm pretty happy with that. You can't really see where the seam line is and it's going to be on the inside anyway. No one's going to know. Also wanted to mention as well, as she mentions in the pattern, the interfacing for the wallet piece needs to be slightly smaller and centered. I just cut it out as the same and then cut off 1 inch. But of course you can do it however way you want. Now when it came to putting on the stabilizers and the interfacing, I did all the interfacing as explained in the pattern, and then I'm going to go ahead and do all the kind of foam and the base interfacing separately and making sure that they're centered in the middle of each piece. The other thing worth mentioning as well with the stabilizer, when you're putting on the foam and the ultra firm stabilizer onto the base piece, you want to not only centralize the foam, but you want to centralize that ultra firm as well, right in the middle of your pieces. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our webbing strap. So you want to grab your slider, and hopefully you've cut your webbing to the length that is needed, as is mentioned in the pattern. We're going to thread it through the middle section of the slider and we're going to fold that raw end under by about 1.5 inches. Now I should mention I'm using nylon webbing. You definitely want to burn the ends with a lighter to make sure that the two ends don't unravel, and it just makes it a lot neater. Because it's nylon, it kind of fuses together. So I'm going to fold that under, and I'm going to add some clips. Then I want to find the other end and put it into one of the swivel hooks. Feed it back through that slider. And then into the other swivel hook. And we're going to fold that edge over and under just like before and place some clips. And now I'm just checking that it is 1.5 inches going under, and I'm going to take it over to my machine and sew what we call a barn door over that end of the strap, and that is to make it really secure. When I'm sewing straps like this and I'm sewing a barn door, I like to use a zipper foot so that I can get really up close to those swivel hooks, and I go along that kind of edge towards the swivel hook first, and then I go backwards and around into a box, and then I do the diagonal lines so that I end up with 2 lines along that turned over raw edge, and this makes it extra secure. Then we're going to move along to our exterior handle piece, and we need to draw a line right down the middle of that piece. Then I'm going to take it over to the iron, and I'm going to fold those outside raw edges into that central line, just like you would do if you were making a normal strap. Then I'm going to take it over to my iron, and I'm going to press those long raw edges into that central line. Then I'm going to fold it over and press it again. If you're enjoying this video, I would really love you to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to share this with a friend. And we're going to take our long handle, and we're going to mark on to this long handle from 2 3/4 inches. I'm using a chalk pen because I'm using dark fabric. So 2 3/4, 3.5, 6 1/4, and 6.5. And we're going to do that on the other end as well. Then I'm going to go over to my machine. I'm going to make a square inside those first 2 marks, the 2 3/4 and the 3.5, on both ends. So my method for the accent piece of the handle is a little bit different. On the instructions, it tells you to place it wrong sides together and to sew along the raw edge. However, I wanted to have it so that my seams were on the inside to make like a tube. This is quite tricky, so this is my technique for doing it. First of all, I place it right sides together, and we're going to sew along that long edge. I'm going to sew it 1/4 inch from the edge, and we're going to sew it up to about 1 inch down that long edge. Then we're going to stop and backstitch a little bit and take the piece out from under the needle. Then we're wanting to push in that first short edge inside. So you're kind of flipping it out the right way, just like you would with a normal tube. Then we're going to match up those right sides together again, and we're going to go back from where we have just started, placing the needle into that last stitch hole. You want to make sure that that little tube that we've just pulled is kind of out the way, but definitely don't pop it all the way out again. Then we're going to sew another couple of inches. Keep checking that that tube that you've just pulled through is definitely out the way of your needle. Don't worry if you skip stitches, you might do because of the bulk. It doesn't matter because with this technique, what we're doing with this grab handle, we're going to be going back and sewing over it anyway. Once you've done another couple of inches, you want to take the piece out again, and we're going to pull that tube even more down through so it's the right side popping through that end. I'm not going to lie, this bit is quite fiddly. The vinyl is obviously not going to want to do it, so just take your time, wiggle it. I don't think this technique would work with a super strong or stiff vinyl, but with this vinyl from Little Stitcher Sews, it works perfectly well. So you want to keep pushing it down through that hole into that tube, and then we're going to go back and we're going to stitch that last inch or so down to the end. Once we've finished stitching, we're going to pull it out from under the needle, and we're going to turn the tube completely the right way out. So now we've got our tube that we've made. We're going to slide it over our long exterior handle, and we want the seam of the vinyl to go on the underneath, the side without the marks. And you may find it easier if you fold that kind of long handle in half to push it through. And we're going to slide it so that it's in the middle of those central two marks. Just check that the seam on the back of the vinyl is slightly off center. I'm going to line it up with those stitch lines that we have on our handle from before, and I'm just clipping it in place. And you want your seam allowance from the vinyl to be going towards the center of that strap. Then we're going to stitch a long rectangle, and we're going to go 1/8 of an inch from that outside mark, so in between your two marks, basically 1/8 of an inch along that top edge, through those middle two marks, and 1/8 of an inch along that bottom edge. Once that's done, I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from that long edge, 1/8 of an inch from the short edge, and 1/4 of an inch from that long edge, so we've got a smaller rectangle inside the vinyl accent. Then we're going to want to be doing our rivet, so we want to make it 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. So I'm just going to mark it with my stiletto, and I'm going to pop my rivets in. You don't have to put rivets in, you can omit this step as well. Next we're going to take our zipper, and we're going to take our wide gusset and our narrow gusset, and we're going to mark the centres of each of these. We're going to take our zip and we're going to place it right sides down on top of that wide gusset, and we're going to clip it matching up that central mark. And we're going to baste 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Then we're going to take our wide gusset lining, and I'm just going to mark the centre piece on that because I didn't earlier, and I should have. And I'm going to place that right sides down on top of that zip that we just basted, and I'm matching up those central notches. And we're going to sew with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way along that edge. So now that's stitched, we're then going to do the same with the exterior narrow gusset. So I'm going to place it right sides down, right sides together, match up that middle mark, and I'm again going to baste it with, and I'm again going to baste it with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to mark the middle of my lining for the narrow gusset as well. And I'm going to turn the zip over and I'm going to place the narrow lining right sides down towards the zipper, match up that central notch, and then I'm going to stitch again with 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along that edge. When I'm stitching this with the regular seams, I'm using a 3 stitch length, and when I'm basting it, I'm using a 6 stitch length. You also want to make sure that as you sew, you keep pulling the other pieces out of the way so that they don't get caught up underneath and accidentally get sewn over. Then we're going to clip the two sides together. So I'm going to clip the narrow gusset together. And I'm going to clip the wide gusset together. And then I'm going to top stitch from that zip edge 1/8 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to take our handle and we're going to turn it over so it's the wrong side up. We're going to place double-sided tape 2.5 inches up from the short edges on both ends. You don't have to mark it, but I just find it's a bit easier. Then we're going to get our 2 D-rings. I'm going to slide them onto the handle. Then we're going to mark the centre of our strap on both ends. Then we're going to find the middle of the whole piece on this gusset on both ends. Then we're going to take off the backing of our double-sided and we're going to place that matching up that middle mark with the middle of the strap and push the tape down. Then we want to flip it over. We're going to unclip, if it's still clipped, that lining. I'm going to clip it going the other way to the short or the narrow gusset. That's going to keep it out of the way when we're stitching this next bit. Then we're going to sew 1/8 inch from that edge, going all the way along up to the line that we made earlier, which was 2 3/4 inches from that edge. I'm just going to mark that line on again, just so I make sure that I do it to the right measurement. And we're going to do the same, of course, on the other side. And we're stitching 1/8 inch from that edge. Then we want to push our D-rings up against those lines of stitching that we've just done, and we're going to place some more double-sided underneath the handle. Then we want to stitch along those marks that we made earlier, so 3.5 inch mark and a 6 1/4 inch mark, and we're going to stitch with 1/8 inch seam allowance, going along that edge, down that mark, along that edge, up that mark, and the same on the other side. So now we have the option to add in our rivets. So I'm going to add one either side of the D-ring and either side of the handle, and I'm going to do them about 1/4 of an inch from the stitching. So I've unclipped the lining that was over this side. I've unclipped that and I'm placing it as it should lie. And we're going to move on to completing this gusset. And we're going to move on to basting all the 4 edges of this top gusset. So like I say, the lining is going to be placed so that it's wrong sides to the exterior. I'm going to baste it 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So I'm going to even that out. Next, we need to check that the top gusset is the same as the base piece. So we're going to see if it is the same width, and mine is a little bit longer, as you can see, or a bit wider. So I'm going to trim that off equally on both sides so that it matches the same width. So sorry to interrupt the tutorial. I have to let you know that I had a bit of a mishap. The camera hadn't been filming for about the last 30 minutes. So I had got to the bottom of the gusset, done all the gusset, and I was about to attach it to the main pieces and show you guys how to do it. And I realised it wasn't filming. So when you see the little vinyl holes, look at that vinyl. That's why. It's because I had to unpick it so that I could refilm it for you guys. I just hope that my bag stands up to all the wear and tear I'm going to give it. Anyway, back to the tutorial. And on the same edge that we stitched before, we're going to stitch along that edge 3/8 of an inch, or if you've got a thicker vinyl, Joe from Country Cow Designs does recommend that you stitch with 1/4 of an inch so that you have a little bit more wriggle room when it comes to putting in those main pieces. So once that's sewn, we're going to fold that back and we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch from that edge. So once we've done that top stitch, we're then going to place the base to the top gusset, right sides together. Just like we did before, I'm going to baste 1/8 of an inch from that edge. I'm also going to add in my little tag at this stage, matching up with the handle. Once that's sewn, we're going to take the lining from the base and we're going to place it right sides to the lining of the top gusset, and we're going to clip and stitch 3/8 of an inch or 1/4 if you're wanting to have a little bit more wriggle room from that edge. Once that's sewn, we're going to flip it the right way out. And we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Then to complete the gusset, we're going to baste the lining of the base to the baste. So we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch along each of those 2 edges. Then we're going to move on to the wallet section on the inside. So you want to take your really long pattern piece for your wallet, and we're going to make marks from the bottom edge. So the first one is going to be 2 1/4. Then from that mark, we want to go 1 3/4. Then 2 1/2. 1 3/4, 2 1/2, 1 3/4, 2 1/2, 2 3/4, 3 1/4, and 3 3/4, which is of course the end. So for this next bit, I'm going to use some pins and I'm going to fold up this wallet piece along those lines that I've just marked. So this is the bottom edge and this is the first line. And the first way we're going to fold it is wrong sides together along that line. So I'm going to use a pin to see where that line is. And I'm going to fold it along there. And I'm just going to place a pin in that fold to keep that nice. Then I'm going to fold it right sides together. Again, place a pin in that fold. I'm going to keep alternating. So we're going wrong sides together on that fold again. And when I'm putting my pins in, I'm putting them from the outside in so that I can take them out really easily later on. So wrong sides together. Take that pin and put it in the middle. Right sides together. Also put clips at the edges. Another way to do it. Sometimes I like to do both. Wrong sides together. So we've alternated all the way, wrong sides together. And you just want to make sure, if you are pinning it, that your pins are all from the same side so you can take them out really easily. And then that last line, we're not going to fold that, we're going to keep that there. So you'll end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 folded pockets. Then we're actually going to cut along that line that we drew. Then I'm just going to press those folds in place. So those are all nicely pressed. I'm then going to go over to my machine and I'm going to top stitch each one of those folds. So the 4 folds. And I'm using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for this and a 3 1/2 stitch length so that it matches my other top stitching. It's also worth noting, hopefully you can see, that I'm pulling out of the way the other excess fabric so that I'm not catching that. In particular, you want to make sure you don't catch that last fold or the top piece of the fabric. So when it's done, it looks like this. So you've still got those 4 folds, but they're now top stitched. The next thing we want to do is we want to mark in the middle of those 4 kind of pleats. Then I'm just going to put that to one side, that top piece, and we're going to pull that top piece, that top fold that hasn't been stitched, out of the way. I want to make sure that this doesn't get caught in the next bit. Then I'm going to clip down those sides just to keep those folds in the right place. And we're going to stitch down that central line, but we're going to stitch just to one side, go all the way up, across the top and down the other side. The stitches are going to be almost next to each other, but either side of that central line. So you can see when I got to the top, hopefully you can see that the stitches are just underneath that top line. That's so that I definitely don't catch that top bit. Don't want to catch that in your stitches. Then we're going to fold it back as it was before. Make sure that it's all neatened up. I'm going to clip those sides and I'm going to baste each side 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now it's important that you start and you stop on this from the same direction. So I'm going to make sure that I start both lines of stitching from that bottom edge. Next we're going to attach our zipper to that top edge. So you want to take your number 3 zipper. I like to, when I've chopped off the end, I like to just put a clip on. That's just a little thing that I do to stop you kind of pulling the zip off that end until it's secured. So we're going to place that zipper right side facing down with the closure to the left. Then we're going to get one of our zipper pockets and we're going to place that right side down. Then we're going to stitch with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance along that edge. Now zippers do like to move, so if you're worried about it, I do recommend that you baste this first by hand. That is the best way to get a non-wobbly zip. But I'm going to go really carefully, make sure that I'm keeping it taut at the right tension and go slowly with my walking foot. And I should add as well that when I'm stitching this zip in, I'm doing it at a 2.5 stitch length, but when I'm going back to doing my top stitching, I'm going to go back to doing a 3.5 stitch length. Then we're going to push those pieces away and we're going to stitch with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along that edge. Once that's top stitched, we're going to get the piece that we cut away earlier, which matches up, and we're going to place that right sides down to the other side of the zip, the top edge. Then we're going to baste that with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we've basted that in place. Then we're going to flip the whole thing over and we're going to get our other zipper pocket piece and we're going to place that right sides down. And then we're going to sew along that top edge 1/4 of an inch. And remember, we're doing this at a smaller stitch length of 2.5. Then once we've done that, we're going to open that top piece up, keeping that back pocket piece down, and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Then we're going to flip the whole thing over and we're going to lift up these 2 pocket pieces. So we're lifting them up away from those folds that we did earlier. It's really important we don't catch those in there. And we're going to clip along that bottom and we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch from that top piece edge. It's not going to match up, that's fine. We don't need to worry about that because we're going to cut off that excess anyway. So 1/4 inch from that kind of top piece edge. Then I'm going to cut off that excess so that lines up really nicely. Finally, I'm going to clip and baste with an 1/8 inch seam allowance down those 2 edges to keep it all really nice together, the pocket and the card slots. Next, we're going to take our 2 side pieces of our wallet and we're going to place them right sides together so that they match along those edges. And we're matching up the bottom edge as well. And we're going to sew those edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and again on a 2.5 length. Then we're going to push those side bits open and then we're going to top stitch again with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Finally, we just need to make sure that that is the right shape, which of course it isn't at the moment. So we're going to grab our other panel and we're going to lay that on top and we're just going to make sure that that is the same. And we're going to cut off that excess. You can mark and cut it, or I'm just going to pin the 2 together and then cut the excess off. So we're going to put that to one side and we're going to keep that other side lining that we cut out and we're going to get our mesh piece, slip pocket, and we're going to get our 10-inch bias binding and I'm going to pin that binding to the top of that pocket piece. I want to make sure that the mesh goes directly in the middle of that binding and doesn't slip. You can glue it in place as well if you prefer. I like to put my pins in at a 90-degree angle and then go slowly over them. Little bit controversial sewing over your pins, but as long as you go slowly, you're not going to break your needle. And I'm going to stitch an 1/8 inch from the bottom edge and then I'm going to stitch an 1/8 inch from the top edge. And when sewing that top edge, I change back from my heavier duty needle down to a size 80 needle and I used a universal just because going through that little bit stretchy material and the bias binding, you don't want to have a really heavy duty. It's going to skip stitches and it's not going to like it. Just remember to move back to a heavier duty needle when you need to go on to the next step. Then we're going to pin and baste that pocket over the other piece of the lining, the other side of the bag. And we're going to stitch from the bottom, we're going to baste it all the way around, going up to the top of that edge of that pocket. It's really important that you start from the middle, go round one side, start from the middle, go round the other side, so that if it does stretch, it's going to stretch evenly and you're not going to get a kind of crazy shaped pocket. I should mention as well, this stretchy mesh, which is the by Annie's mesh, it only stretches in one way, and you want to construct your pocket, cut your mesh piece. Right when you're cutting out your piece, you want to make sure that the stretch is going across the width of your piece. You don't want the stretch going up and down because it's not going to be as beneficial as going across the width. Next, we're going to take our 2 main panels and we're going to mark the center of the top and bottom of each panel. So then we're going to take our front exterior piece and we're going to take our wallet piece and we're going to place them wrong sides together. And we're going to clip and baste 1/8 inch all the way around the edge. And we're also going to do that with the back panel and the back lining piece. Next, we need to take our front panel, the panel with the wallet pieces in, and we need to place it so that it's right sides to the gusset. Now to do this, we need to flip this inside out. And we're going to be matching up the narrow gusset to the front. That's really important. And we're going to be matching up that central mark, and we're going to clip it at the middle of the bottom and the middle of the top first. And then I'm clipping it either side about 1.5 inches at the top, just before the curve starts, and then I'm going to clip it along that bottom edge right up to the edge of, or the start of that curve. Now this is meant to be a really tight fit. If it wasn't, you're going to get some puckering and it's going to look a bit, well, it's not going to look as perfect as we want it to be. But the way to do this is we're going to snip into the curves to make them fit in. And we're going to snip into the gusset, and we're going to snip in about 1/4 inch of the way in. And I'm easing it in from both edges, kind of moving it around so that it fits in. If you go all the way from one side, you don't have as much wriggle room. It's just a bit easier if you go from both sides at once, kind of thing. Once that's all clipped in place, we are then going to hand baste around there just to make it a lot easier when it comes to stitching that on the sewing machine. If we were to take this over to the machine, then you can't obviously sew over the clips and it's going to get cumbersome and probably move. So it's always best to hand baste it. Next, we're going to go to the machine and stitch that up, and we're going to use a scant 3/8 inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. Next, once that's stitched in, you want to make sure that you've caught in all your different pieces. Check from the front, check that you've caught in all those corners. Then we're going to take one of our bias binding strips. We're going to start at the bottom and we're going to clip it over the edge of our seam allowance. I'm going to clip that all the way around. I'm going to pull it nice and taut as we go so that it keeps everything in place. Then when you've clipped it all the way around, come back to the bottom and fold that in half, and hopefully it will match up in the middle where you marked the middle of the pieces before. Then we're going to take that over to the machine and we're going to stitch it about 1/8 inch from the edge of the binding. So then we're going to do exactly the same as we did with the front panel with our back panel. So we're going to place it right sides together. I'm actually going to open the zip at this point just to make sure that that is going to be open for turning it out. And we're going to match up that middle line that I marked. I think that's going to be hard for you to see on camera, with that middle notch in the top. Okay, so that's all clipped into place, and I'm now going to baste all the way around the edge by hand, just like I did on the other side. And just like before, I'm going to take that over to the machine and I'm going to sew that with a scant 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. So now that first line of stitching is done, I'm going to grab my other piece of bias binding, and just like before, I'm going to start at the bottom, clip it all the way around, fold it over at the bottom as well to close it, and then I'm going to stitch it on the machine with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So now all the binding is done, we're going to turn it the right way out. And then all there is to it is to attach our strap, and it's ready to wear. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you've loved this tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe for more sewing tutorials and tips. I'll see you on the next video.